Chapter 23. Jim Garfield Behind the Wheel. Jim Garfield delayed as long as he could the downshifting of his detailed colony as he negotiated the descending double S's. The one-of-a-kind colony was technically owned by Reva Mae Vinson, the mother of his first child. Jim Garfield figured it would raise fewer flags if a suburban mom rented her colony to the likes of Jim Garfield and David Hunter Duncan and Ray, who would in turn do laps at the Horsepower Heaven Motor Club, than if one of them owned it outright. For a little more than the price of green fees at an upscale golf club, Jim Garfield was able to lease the Parnelli course for 25 minutes. For 25 minutes, he could do whatever he pleased on the 1.7-mile course, except drive clockwise. There were excellent simulators on the market, and Jim Garfield enjoyed messing around with them, but none of them could ever compete with the real thing. They could simulate motion, but they could never simulate the feel, the spawned in the wheels vibrations that rocked the driver's every atom. And the simulators did not emit high-performance exhaust either, the sweetest smell Jim Garfield had ever known. Why do they always make perfumes that smell perfumey? Why don't they market high-octane exhaust with a hint of burnt rubber? A girl could have any man she wanted. Pushing a colony through a road course was how Jim Garfield focused himself. Not that he was ever anything but focused. He was naturally organized and never forgetful on important things. He never lost perspective of what he deemed important. But the combination of speed and adrenaline and comfort forced him to concentrate deeply and precisely. It was during these periods of a relaxed excitability that a part of Jim Garfield's mind started talking to him. Three matters concerned the voice within: Joe Fungo, David Hunter Duncan, and Ulysses Johnson. Three abandoned satchels waiting to explode when the curious opened them. Ulysses Johnson had been Jim Garfield's probation officer, or community supervisor as they preferred to be called, and he had helped Jim Garfield a great deal. Ulysses had found him a job with an unusually flexible attendance policy. Jim Garfield did not know it at the time, but Ulysses had orchestrated some delivery jobs for him that paid much better than straight work. And only months later would he learn that Ulysses had moved him up the ranks of his crew because you are too smart to be a mule. Ulysses Johnson had been smooth. He had finagled to get the most talented parolees into his caseload, and he played them like chess pieces, and none of the Mensa Group convicts ever realized that he was playing them. Ulysses made every move through 2 or 3 proxies, each an honored graduate of his community supervision. He might still be moving pieces here and there had he not suffered a mental breakdown. Ulysses Johnson had taken to dressing eccentrically. There was a Jesus phase, a comic book phase, a purple Dracula phase, and he might have actually originated the pop trend of wearing miniature LCDs in one's hair. People might have been tolerant of his flamboyance had he not started bragging to his parolees that he was their puppeteer. Jim Garfield approached the quarter-mile straightaway that gave way to a 12-degree right turn. It was here that the Parnelli course offered the driver his maximum speed opportunity. Jim Garfield took the long view of the stretch. He had worked at holding the big picture until he approached a small poplar tree he used as a landmark. At that point, he switched to a shorter perspective and shifted and steered through a gauntlet of curves, rises, and dips. Even with his sharpened focus, Jim Garfield relaxed enough for the voice to continue. Ulysses Johnson could never again be trusted. He should not have been trusted before, but that was a mulligan. He was connected to law enforcement. More and more criminal enterprises were being run by cops. It was the untold story of the day. They played by different rules than real criminals. It worked out well most of the time, but when the shit hit the fan, cops were treated differently by the system. For every corrupt Leo, there were 24 cases swept under the refrigerator because the bad apple might expose more bad apples. The Leos would handle it their own way. Ulysses Johnson was a loose cannon, all right. He must have been in some kind of trouble, or else he wouldn't have disappeared for so long. He might be bird-dogging his old crew as part of a cop-to-cop deal. Even if he wasn't bird-dogging, he was still crazy. He had that pronounced manic look permanently stamped on his face. Jim Garfield braked for the hairpin. It was the only feature of the Parnelli course he disliked. No one handled the hairpin much better or worse than anyone else. Yes, there was a hairpin at Monaco, but so what? It was only marginally less annoying than a traffic light. Then there was David Hunter Duncan. From the time he woke up until the time he went to bed, he was plotting a criminal scheme. Bank jobs, armored car jobs, white-collar schemes. But he frequently fantasized about escape, busting out from custody and staying hidden. He liked to run his ideas by Jim Garfield and Ray, and they would always find flaws. Jim Garfield kept David Hunter Duncan out of trouble by keeping him busy. But now, Delbert Wayne Duncan was incarcerated, and there was no telling what his father might attempt. Even if he were not involved, it was doubtful that Jim Garfield would have anything to do with David Hunter Duncan's capers. The authorities knew that they were close friends, and the authorities would comb through the details of Jim Garfield's life. Not a pleasant thought. And still there was Joe Fungo to add to Jim Garfield's worries. Fungo was a laboratory genius. Drugs, poisons, toxins, bombs, even germs. And he could do large-scale production and packaging with skills that other chemists seemed to lack. He had made Jim Garfield a millionaire, and if he lived a few more years, he might just make him a wealthy man by East Texas standards. But Joe Fungo knew Jim Garfield's darkest secret, a secret that could have him forever shunned by real criminals. Jim Garfield's dorky cousin, Phil McDaniel, would have to bring himself up to speed on production techniques and climate control and all those deficiencies that hindered his chemical brilliance in the past. He would have to expand his knowledge base because Joe Fungo would someday disappear. But the fungal problem would be moved to the back burner. Jim Garfield had two more immediate concerns to address. 2 loose cannons filled to the muzzle. Fungal could wait. Jim Garfield took the double S's just a little too fast, but it was enough to make the Kalani's rear end wiggle. It was a display of steering prowess that he would later marvel at. He turned this way into the skid and then turned that way into the counter skid and repeated this maneuver several times as he let off the accelerator. The spin-out was averted. A supreme episode of driving that will never be acknowledged or rewarded, Jim Garfield reflected. Then he remembered the old line that good drivers can steer out of a spin, but great drivers don't have to. The spinners, Spin City, Spincast, Spin Out, Jim Garfield resolved to tighten his grip on his professional life. I cannot lose control. I cannot lose control. I cannot lose control. The flagman's checkered banner signaled that Jim Garfield's time on the Parnelli course had expired.